In 2016, a woman from the British county of Hertfordshire received the Guinness World Record for ownership of the largest Pokémon memorabilia and merchandising collection in the world. At the time of the record's award, Lisa Kearney had in her possession over 17,000 items related to the franchise, which has since grown to encompass over 21,000 individual merchandising tokens as of 2021. When asked about what fueled her obsession with the brand, she mentioned that 24 years back, she had read about the Japan release of Pokémon Red and Green, and she fell in love with the concept right then and there. Pokémon, she said, helped her escape a life in which she was bullied at school and mocked for her tastes. She indicates that, after a particularly hard day at school, she would come home and find solace in the pages of the manga and on her Game Boy Color. And she has felt that way ever since. Truly powerful brands are those that create a profound connection with its customers. The kind of deep relationship that Lisa Kearney has with Pokémon is a paramount example of this. There is a big incentive for brands to be in contact with children during their formative years, so that they stick with their products once they become an adult with money to spend without any parents around trying to curtail their passion from the franchise. Pokémon is a prime example of this. Now, for full disclosure, I should say that I love Pokémon. I remember playing Pokémon Ruby in my busted Game Boy Advance with my friends during summer nights, completely ignoring the world around us. And even today, I still keep my eye on for new releases, and part of me gets excited when a Nintendo Direct drops, just on the fleeting chance that a new game might be announced. And on particularly bad days, I still boot up my Switch and play a few hours of some Pokémon game or another. Pikachu has a stronghold in my heart, and I am not sure I want it to let go. But then again, this is all a master strategy the brands follow. A product is never just a product. A single video game is not just the experience, but its own little ecosystem of secondary markets. In the case of Pokémon, it is not so little. Welcome to another episode of Rebel Economics. Today, we will look at how Pokémon became the most profitable media franchise in the world, analyzing the revenue streams and why they are, and remain, so incredibly powerful. Using data from 2021, the Pokémon franchise firmly positions itself as the most profitable multimedia brand in the world, with an estimated $118 billion in aggregated revenue. Now, for full disclosure, since the actual amount varies quite a bit, this calculation includes revenues generated from merchandise sales, video games, box office sales, and other smaller percentages like home entertainment or sales of strategy guidebooks. Pokémon occupies the first place in revenues generated by a media brand, having overtaken Star Wars at almost $70 billion, Winnie the Pooh at $80 billion, and Hello Kitty, the runner-up, with almost $90 billion. So, this hierarchy of pop culture emperors leaves us with two fundamental questions. What differentiates the Pokémon brand to not only be the highest revenue-generating franchise in the world, but by such a large margin, almost $30 billion? And who the hell is buying so much Hello Kitty stuff? The first question we will try to answer today. The second one is beyond human understanding, and I will not embark on such a futile attempt. So considering this $118 billion figure, the breakdown of the franchise's revenues goes as follows. The sales of merchandise are responsible for over 77% of total revenues. The video games generate 22% of Nintendo's pocket dollars, and the rest of the properties divvy up the remaining 1%, with box office revenues being responsible for half of that at $1.18 billion. This breakdown of revenue points to the fact that much like other franchises in the list, it is not the core product itself that brings in the revenue for entities like the Pokémon Company, but rather associated sales of her merchandise surrounding the main product. This situation is not strange at all. With the advent of globalized production and supply chains, these industries could create cheaply made products that they can then slap their logo onto and sell for disproportionate profits. For example, Avengers Endgame might have been one of the highest box office hits in history, with almost $2.8 billion generated worldwide. But that is peanuts compared with the almost 3 times larger revenue generated by sales of plastic Captain America shields, Iron Man masks, or Hulk gloves. Additionally, George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars, can be considered a visionary for many reasons. Not the least of them is his ability to arguably engineer the first blockbuster in movie history, but I believe his finest hour when he came up with Darth Vader being Luke's dad, but instead when he decided to lower his salary by $500 million prior to the release of the original Star Wars in order to keep the full rights of merchandise revenues of his franchise. In 2012, when Lucas sold Lucasfilms, Disney forced him to give up his merchandising rights, since the mouse was already aware of the sheer volume of profit to be had from lightsabers and Princess Leia costumes. So yes, Pokémon is not alone regarding the outsized effect of merchandise sales on its bottom line. Essentially every game, manga, or episode of the anime series is more akin to a trailer for the real business: Pikachu plushies, Torchic flip-flops, and Snorlax blankets. In 1998, Nintendo commissioned the creation of the Pokémon Company, a legal entity and operational company, created to better manage the merchandising and licensing of Pokémon franchise products. It is composed in equal parts of Nintendo, Game Freak, and Creatures Inc. According to its timeline, its activities began in 1998, with the opening of the Tokyo Pokémon Center. It was previously known as Pokémon Ltd., established in 2000. Since then, it became the Pokémon Company. The US branch opened in 2001 to handle licensing of its products overseas. Since 2001, almost all products are copyrighted under the name Pokémon, with the acknowledgement of Nintendo, Game Freak, and Creatures Inc. The three companies also have ownership of all of the Pokémon-related trademarks in Japan, while Nintendo is the sole owner of Pokémon-related trademarks in other countries. In 2009, Pokémon USA and its UK counterpart, Pokémon UK, merged to become the Pokémon Company International, which currently handles all Pokémon operations outside of Asia, under the management of Kenji Okubo. But what is the underlying reason for the Pokémon Company's success? How is it possible that Pokémon has a larger merchandising revenue than Star Wars and the MCU? One argument could be the sheer long time that they have been promoting their pocket monsters. Ever since the release of the original Pokémon games in 1996, which has a first mover advantage of over 12 years from the MCU, who officially started in 2008. But this argument is misleading. Firstly, because simply being in the market for longer does not necessarily mean that the customers are going to want to purchase your merchandise. And secondly, because other franchises on the list, like Star Wars, have been around for much longer, with the original film being released in 1977. So if Pikachu's advantage over Iron Man is its time on the market, how can it be explained that it is also ahead of Vader? The truth, I believe, is the sheer flexibility of the Pokémon brand and the way in which it was engineered to sell merchandise to a degree that Star Wars and the MCU are not even close to. We're currently working on a video of cinematic universe, where we argue that the true incentive for Hollywood studios to transition from the traditional sequel formula to the much more complex cinematic universe is the ability of a single show being able to spawn another few, be it based on secondary characters, like the Falcon and the Winter Soldier show in Disney+, or simply by exploring previously unknown but still connected corners of the universe, like the House of the Dragon in HBO Max or the Mandalorian in Disney+. I think a similar effect is at play in Pokémon. Game Freak was revered when they first came up with a successful piece of software that would allow a player to embody over 150 individual characters, that being the size of the original Pokédex. Players were used to RPGs with a limit of about 10 playable characters, but probably far fewer. So being able to get your hands on so many of the Pocket Monsters and raise them to become more evolved versions of themselves was an astounding concept, never before seen in a video game format. But what the Pokémon Company, Game Freak, and Nintendo have done particularly well is embodying each of their Pokémon with enough personality and character for it to not be considered disposable. Be it in the manga, their animations in the mainline games, or the anime, these static sprites of black and white monsters that Japanese players first met in 1996 have gained an identity. They moved past disposable blocks of code, with an image attached to them, to become actual characters. Now, I am not trying to defend that every single one of the 905 current Pocket Monsters are equally suited to sustain a franchise. Far from it. I would be extremely surprised if there is a huge pocket of the fandom clamoring for a buddy cop starring Klefki and Rongerola. But on average, most of them have been encoded with enough personality to transition from a sprite and a cry in the games to actual fictional beings. This process, either conscious on the part of Game Freak or accidental at first, is what I believe has turned Pokémon into the infinite franchise, one that can continue forever and break down into as many genres and media as it desires, and thereby consistently be woven into the zeitgeist of each generation, expanding its merchandising possibilities exponentially. For an example of the dynamic nature of the Pokémon franchise, We can look at which Pokémon received the spotlight on the different media that, as we stated, Nintendo and Game Freak used to enhance the brand and eventually convert into cash via their merchandise sales. First, let's look at the games. Obviously, the games is the media vertical that is most relevant for the company. Beyond sales of products derived from them, sales of the games represent 22% of the franchise's revenues. But as we know, this is not their objective. Yeah, the Pokémon Company wants sales of games to be high. At the end of the day, it is a source of revenue of fundamental magnitude without which Nintendo would not be able to sustain its market share of the video game industry. You can check a video we made about just that topic by following the eye icon on the top right of the screen. But their overall strategy with the game is, like any other media that is a secondary source of revenue for the company, to prop up merchandise sales. So how do they do this? Well, for once, Pokémon releases not only one, but two new generations of Pokémon games every 3 years or so. What this means, by the very nature of the game's setting and story, that about 100 new Pokémons are going to be introduced every 3 years, rejuvenating the brand immediately and incrementally expanding the available source of merchandising revenue. Consider this. In 1996, Game Freak only had 151 Pocket Monsters to make plushies, blankets, and onesies of. Currently, there are the aforementioned 905 individual monsters, each of them a fundamental engine of revenue and pop culture relevance. Now, as mentioned before, not all of them have to be absolute bangers on every generation. This is quite impossible, since there are so many different designs. A large number of them will be. And that, plus a successful marketing campaign that showcases some of the cutest and coolest ones, will be enough to have children and adults excited about the next generation. Additionally, during the period of time where no new generations are released, Game Freak has engineered its intellectual property machinery to put out remastered versions of older generations. For example, during the third generation, the remix of Gen 1 got released, and so it has remained ever since that first successful market test. The objective of this is to present a new generation of players with characters of games that might not have had the chance to play, reactivating their ability to move merchandise, and of course, to tug at the strings of nostalgia in older fans' hearts. Their logic goes something like this. Do you remember how fun it was playing Pokémon Ruby in the summer? Yes, it was. But now, what do you have? Taxes and work and knee pain? Why not go back to Hoenn, where you're still 10? And also, why not get that Mudkip shirt? It's okay if you never wear it in public and no one sees it. It is for you, not for them. However, it is in this topic of non-mainline games where this strategy gets more interesting. A non-mainline game in the Pokémon franchise is basically every game that is not either a new generation or a remake. There is some discussion about this online, but we can proceed with this working definition. Non-mainline games are where Game Freak can move away from the direct objective of creating new characters or revitalizing existing ones. Here Nintendo can further define the character of existing Pokémons, adding a degree of personality that would not be possible in the framework of standard games. For example, I'm constantly surprised about the characters they prioritize to bring to Pokémon Unite, the League of Legends inspired online free-to-play Pokémon game. Here players select to play as one of the Pokémon for the entire duration of the match, and beyond the standard fixtures of every piece of Pokémon media like Pikachu and the original starters, then there are some random selections like Talonflame, Eldegoose, Crustle. I mean, why? Why focus on those random selections? A similar thing happens in Super Smash games. Of course you have the quintessential Pikachu and the cool Mewtwo, but why Incineroar and Jigglypuff? And as a final example, consider the Pokken game, a series about real-time, non-turn-based battle between Pokémon. Why include Chandelure and Weavile? Who was asking for them? I believe I have come up with the answer to all of these questions. No one asked for those particular characters, but by Game Freak putting them in those games, next time you run into their forgettable models in a mainline game, you will remember them doing all of these cool things in all of those other installments, and perhaps one of them might become your new favorite, and you might want to buy a hat with their face on it. And so, the Pokémon Company has created an engine for sales from a character that had originally very little merchandising potential. This process of giving personality to Pokémon that might otherwise get overlooked in the mainline titles and thereby activating their cross-selling potential is, I believe, most present in the episodes of the anime. The anime episode structure follows a fairly simple Saturday morning cartoon structure, But the interesting part is how most of the episodes focus on a new Pokémon that the main characters encounter in their travels across the many regions. Generally, the Pokémon-centric episodes expand on that character's lore and identity, giving them a particular personality and identity that the game simply cannot do. For example, consider the third season of the original Pokémon anime, titled The Johto Journeys or Pokémon the Series Gold and Silver. Of the 40 episodes that make up this season, over half are Pokémon-centric episodes that focus almost exclusively on a single Pokémon's desires, pains, and personalities. The anime is the single most popular tool for advertising merchandising that Game Freak has after the games. It has been airing more or less uninterrupted since 1997, and its objectives have always been to characterize and show what lies behind the stats and the sprite of the mainline games. Nintendo, Game Freak, and Creatures Incorporated are well aware of the impact that their brand has had on the world, the potential of its games to retain market share, and the structure of their releases to constantly have their brand tattooed at the very heart of 21st century pop culture. Customers, I believe, especially parents, should be aware of how the system is set up to separate them from their dollars, one plushie at a time. But I struggle to be pessimistic about it. I am rationally aware that Pokémon is just another profit-maximizing, stockholder-submitted brand. But at the same time, I will be there when Pokémon Scarlet and Violet release, because the promise to return to that world is really enticing for me. And who knows, maybe that promise really is worth $118 billion. Thank you for watching Rebel Economics. If you found this video interesting, please consider liking and subscribing. And if you do, remember to turn on the notifications by clicking the bell, so that you will be notified when we release new videos. If you like this one, you might also like our analysis on how Nintendo was saved from their Wii U debacle by the Switch. Or instead, you could check out our video about why data shows that you should only have to work 4 days a week. Thank you once again for your time, and I will see you in the next video.